So this is the introductory video to History and EALC 583, Imperial China. And in this short video, what I'm going to be talking about are dynasties and a little bit about how to pronounce Chinese terms easily in English. So first of all, with dynasties, these are pretty important because these are the foundational political units that we are dealing with in this class. They relate a lot to how Chinese time was kept, and you're going to see them come up again and again in your reading, so it's pretty important to be familiar with just basically what they are. In terms of pronunciation, you absolutely do not need to know Chinese to take this class. There is absolutely no requirement you have any familiarity with the Chinese language, but it will be useful for remembering terms, for being able to talk about them, for understanding what your classmates say, for understanding what I say. If you just have kind of basic passing familiarity with how to deal with all of these, X's and CH's and, ZH's and these things that you see in Chinese. Really not difficult to pronounce in English. So we'll just go over that a little bit. So to get started here, what is a dynasty? Now, most basically, a dynasty is a state that is founded by a family or a clan. So usually we would say, clan or lineage more than family, because these tend to be quite large units. So you have many imperial princes, many people in the retinue, and at the head of this family is the emperor. We have very few examples of empresses leading dynasties in Chinese history, and they tend to be in this position of the Empress Dowager. You might have heard this term with the very end of the imperial period, late 19th, early 20th century, who is an empress who's actually reigning in the stead of her young son. So generally, we think of dynasties as being headed by a male emperor. So these are the dynasties we're going to be dealing with in this course. This course starts out in what you call in Chinese history the Middle Period, which is a little bit earlier than the Song dynasty. It's a preceding dynasty before it, but it corresponds to a kind of late medieval period in the European calendar. So we'd start out here with the Song dynasty. We move to the Yuan, which is the Mongol period. The last two dynasties, the Ming and the Qing. So I'll give their dates here. The reason that I have these other ones kind of out to the side, Jin, Liao, and Xixia, are that these states are Chinese-style dynasties, but they do not have ethnically Han Chinese ruling houses. So the term we use to refer to these, and we will learn about them a little bit, is conquest dynasty. We'll write this out. Conquest dynasty. Now, it's kind of a funny term because if you think about it, all dynasties are conquest dynasties. All states, use conquest to establish themselves. But this is a kind of term that references their non-Chinese origins, you could say, even though they really have Chinese bureaucratic and political structures. So we're dealing with mainly these four states, and the Song has a northern and a southern component that we'll deal with, but you can think of it as a kind of single period. These terms here, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing, these are not the last names of the dynastic founders. So dynasties were named for either kind of geographic location, either where they were or hearkening back to an older state that had existed where they were, or they're named for a kind of positive term. So we see with the Song, this term, Song is a geographic term. There was a state of Song in ancient China, and the Song dynasty took that term as its namesake. These latter three, the Yuan, the Ming, and the Qing, these are all terms that have positive meanings. So think of this term Yuan, it's kind of most basic meaning would be origin, but something like original basis, foundation, this kind of connotation. Now, this was the Mongolian period of Chinese history, and we know that this term was actually recommended to Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor of China, as a way to kind of establish Mongolians as a legitimate dynasty, as indeed a true Chinese-style dynasty. And this is one of the things you'll learn about is Mongol rule actually was not destructive in China and really just looks quite similar to the Song dynasty before it. Ming, this term here means brightness or kind of brilliance. So again, another kind of positive term. There's lots of speculation about whether or not this is a term for kind of Zoroastrianism because of the way the dynasty was founded. We don't know, but it's certainly a positive term in Chinese. But it is not the name of the dynasty's founder. And then this last dynasty, Qing, this is a term that means pure. So again, another positive term. And there's something else interesting here in dynastic naming, is that think of Ming brilliance as being related to fire and the kind of elemental things. If things are related to wood, air, water, or fire, Ming is related to fire. Again, it doesn't mean fire. It means something like brilliance or shining, brightness. But it has that fire component to it. Qing, on the other hand, is related to water. Again, it means purity, but it has this radical here, what we call radical in a Chinese character, is water radical. So the idea with Qing naming was not only was Qing a positive term in and of itself, it was purity, it was also the water was squashing the fire of the Ming. So there's lots of these things that are present in dynastic naming. For these conquest dynasties, we are actually not entirely sure about Jin. It means gold. People speculate that's because gold had a positive meaning. It's also probably a geographic term for a certain river. So geographic terms over here. Liao is certainly a term for a river. But there's a lot that went into choosing a dynasty's name, but they're not surnames. The word for dynasty in Chinese was this term Chao, and I bring this up because this is how people at the time referred to their own state. So people didn't say, I live in China, or the Chinese equivalent of that. They would say, my dynasty, this, our dynasty, this. Or often you see something like great. So great Qing, great Ming. And even other states of kind of equal stature will be given that great prefix. So there was a sense that although, and we'll talk about this in the upcoming weeks, there was a kind of continuity of what it could mean to be Chinese, these are really quite separate states. This is not an unbroken history of China, particularly since the Yuan dynasty is actually the ruling house is not Chinese, and the ruling house is not Han Chinese in the Qing dynasty either. When I say Han Chinese, I'm referring to the dominant ethnic group, and numerically dominant ethnic group in China. So these are the basics just about what a dynasty is. Something you will see is this term Taizu. And again, I'm just using this kind of anglicized pronunciation of Chinese. I'm not a native speaker, obviously. So this is the first emperor of the dynasty. So here we have Song Taizu. So this means he's the first emperor of Song. Again, you won't see this all the time, but just in case you come across this term in your reading, you now have an idea of what it means. So this is really literally a term like supreme ancestor. And here, just a little note on the portrait, you will be able to tell by the end of this course when a portrait is from by the headwear. This kind of distinctive Song headwear. These long, horizontal piece of the hat. So a little bit about emperors' names. Emperors had multiple names. Emperors from some dynasties had names in multiple languages. You don't need to know all of the details. In fact, most educated, literate people in China had multiple names. But what you should be conscious of is a reign name versus a personal name. And it's more common in scholarship now to use the reign name. But when you read some older things, and occasionally you'll see personal names, the best source, honestly, to look these up is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a problematic source for arguments. In terms of basic facts for Chinese history, it is just fine. There's a chronology of Chinese dynasties if you ever need to know. Again, hopefully this won't come up. The reading should be fairly clear, but I just want to equip you with this knowledge in case at times it's confusing. So this is, for example, the Qianlong Emperor. emperor in the 18th century, so Qing dynasty. It's kind of height of Qing power. He's a very well-known emperor. He was a very active emperor. He actually made a lot of policies himself. This name here, Qianlong, is his reign name. So just to give you an example here, the reign name is Qianlong. So you'll call him the Qianlong Emperor. His personal name is down here was Hongli. And not the kind of thing you need to, memorize for every emperor, but just so that you're aware that a single person may be referred to by two names. And that we tend to refer to them a little differently. The something emperor versus, his name, so-and-so. So timekeeping in Imperial China, something to bring up, and I think in everything that you read that's assigned for this course, time will be kept in the standard kind of, in our own calendar that we're familiar with. Time in Imperial China was kept by the reign name. So, for example, with the Qianlong Emperor, if we wanted to say 1737. So here, this is his reign. That's what that R marks. And I want to say 1737. It would be Qianlong. Want to guess? Okay, it'd be Qianlong 2. So this is how people in China at the time kept a sense of their calendar. So, these imperial names mattered, and occasionally you might come across this, certainly when you're kind of reading for your own projects. Again, just in case, and it's interesting to know how people themselves thought of time in the absence of, the calendar that we're all used to using. So last, a little bit about easier pronunciation. So again, we have these dynasties, and just put them up from before. CCI is missing, but that's okay. Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing. So basically, what I want to bring up here is for Song, this O is a little bit long, like orphan. Not like our word song, like I sing a song. So just, elongate that out. Again, pronounce things however you want, but if it helps you to remember things, if it helps you to understand people speaking or hear me speaking a little bit better, that's why I bring this up. UN, I don't know, the YU basically becomes a U. And I guess the AN becomes like an EN. Now there are a lot of guides online for how to pronounce Chinese really properly. What I'm giving you is how to pronounce it kind of okay in English without worrying about tones or an accent or anything like this. Just kind of standard English pronunciation of Chinese. Ming, nothing exceptional about this. The ING keeps the same sound. Qing, what I want to point out is this Q. This is really very simple. You can just think of Q as equaling CH. Again, actually in Chinese the sound is a little different, but that is more or less the romanization. Jin, hard J, Liao. Again, just think of it as separating into syllables. But these, I think, not quite so tricky. Couple things I also want to point out. The ZH, which you will see a lot, think of it like a hard J, like jam or Joe. That's all that ZH is. This term you will see quite a bit. It's a very common phoneme in Chinese. It has a lot of meanings. Sure. It's a standard Mandarin pronunciation. So it's almost like the word sure. This I has like an ER sound. Something language learners say when they go to Beijing often. Beijing dialect is now considered standard Mandarin dialect in China. Is that people kind of sound like pirates because you'll actually hear this R sound all the time, and it's this letter I. taking out an R sound. So just pointing this out. It's not really she, it's sure. So practice that a few times. Xing, this X, really think of it as being similar to an S. You know, again, it's kind of like the Q where that's not exactly it, but that is really, really close enough for any of our purposes. And A's are long, like the term aunt, not aunt. So I'd say another common word. This is chong.